Welcome to EntheoRadio, where we talk about shamanism and altered states for healing purposes. This is your host, Captain Hugh T Alkemi. I'll be guiding you through these airwaves as we surf on with a special guest today, Franco Romero. Did I do your last name right?
You did my last name right, except I want to be on the ship that you're on. So how do I sign up?
Come on aboard the mystery ship. It's not visible yet, but I think it's all around us.
Cool, very cool. I'm in.
All right, so Franco is a top 10 best-selling author. He's a clairvoyant and a spiritual teacher. His book is titled The Closet Spiritualist, which chronicles Franco's path to self-enlightenment and serves as a manual to help others do the same. He's had some very interesting childhood experiences, which is probably how we're going to open up the conversation. And he speaks with a collective who might speak through him today. This collective's name is Caleb. Welcome to the show, Franco.
Well, thank you for having me. Really, really excited to be here. I'm glad we're finally doing this together.
We're all doing this all the time, all the listeners and everyone who's willing to tune into the frequencies and do it without their ears. So thank you.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You are right about that.
So the bio that you gave me describes a near-death experience. Let's take all the way back in time for our listeners to that moment, as an infant, apparently.
Well, if you really want to go back, we'll have to go before past lives, but I think we don't have enough time for this. So
Yeah.
we'll just start from this point in the linear timeline. Okay. I don't know how many near-death experience people you've been with or have had a chance to talk to, or your audience, but
A lot.
a lot. Cool. Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to say will sound awfully familiar to most people. Then, my experience actually happened when I was very, very little. I died when I was about 6 months old. So I didn't really know about the experience until much later in life, after having just a series of events, some short, some very long, that led me to really start questioning whether the things that I was perceiving about life, like the voices I was hearing, the things that I was seeing, were, to me as a kid, very normal. But realizing that, hey, maybe that isn't necessarily what everybody's seeing. And so when I was about 17, I actually had a series of visions and dreams where I actually saw all of the events that led to my near-death experience, through to what happened when I crossed. And really that portion of it was something that I had never really seen before until about that age, but it was very clear what had happened when I crossed, and the experience that I had in terms of what's on the other side. This is way back, like in the early 80s. So this is going to date me, but it's way back in the early 80s. And there's like, I'm in my teens and I don't necessarily have any way of validating any of this stuff. So that process in and of itself took years and years and years to finally come to grips with it, hear other people's stories about it, understand what happened when I crossed over this tremendous sort of loving energy that people describe, the light, those kind of things. I could get into the specifics about the actual experience itself if you wanted me to, but in general, it was very similar to what everybody was saying through as the years went on, and we're describing NDEs. There were a couple of unique pieces to this that started coming through later on in my life with regards to the NDE. One was this skill set, if you will, that I inherited from coming out of that NDE. I came to find out later on that the skill set really is something that pretty much every NDE person has. It just depends on how much resistance they have to it. And the skill set is just the clairvoyant skills that we all have. But they become very dominant when you have an NDE, because as I was told later, people who have NDEs in particular, well, they write they write in their contract, so to speak, that they're going to have this NDE experience, and they do it specifically for the purpose of remembering who they are, and then ultimately, within the grand scheme of what's happening right now, is to be a light to the world, whether it's their community, first and foremost to themselves, and then to the people around them, and then however or whatever they're supposed to do in this world. They're supposed to bring the light through, which is really, a light is another way of saying energetically the truths that we are, who we are, the awareness, the awakening, and so on and so forth. So for me, the clairvoyant skills happened very early, very, very, very early. As I told you, I was having visions and dreams and all sorts of things. I even lived in a house for 6 years that was extremely haunted. I mean, it was like Poltergeist meets The Exorcist 2.0. And the awareness that there was something around me, not just this heavy negative energy, but also this beautiful loving energy that would speak to me and remind me consistently that I was okay, that I wasn't going to be hurt, because my light, they kept saying my light shines too brightly. And at that age, I mean, that's way back when I was like 6 or 7 years old, 8, 9, 10 years old. And to me, I just didn't really understand it, but I did feel it, and I felt safe. So so that was one of the things that really came out of my NDE, which I try now to work with NDE people, and anyone else, because it's not that anyone else can't do this. In fact, everybody's going to be doing this in the very near future. It's just much easier to get it out of NDE people, because they, as they've always told me, they knew, but they just didn't know how to express it. So the clairvoyance, the ability to speak to higher consciousness, are all natural skill sets that we have and are a result of the NDE. So I hope that kind of explains. I didn't give you the specifics of the NDE, because a lot of times people, but a lot of times people get lost in the story, and they don't really understand that there are some deeper messages. And hey, I was guilty of that. For years, I just hung on to the story and sort of misconstrued it in some way, to think that, oh, I had an NDE, I'm like, must be really special. And it's not anything about that at all. And I missed all the story, the real, meat and potatoes of what the NDE was about. I missed it all because of it. So, but now I understand it and can help to communicate that better to others who have had it, and those people are just fascinated with the subject. So
I have an interjection there. So you said I missed it all, right?
Right.
I missed it all. Sounds to me a lot like I mystical.
Yay, you're right. And
Hey,
actually, that's really good. I like that. You actually got my hair kind of frizzing up a little bit right now, because you're right.
it's a mystical experience, and that's really where you can look at it as two sides of a coin, or dualistic opposites. There's what the physical happened, there's what the non-physical happened, and that mystical side of things boosted your abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that I've told people this before, but I really feel that the fact that I had this experience at such a young age allowed me to sort of start with a clean slate with all of this. So I went through my life thinking that a lot of what I was experiencing was quote unquote normal within the definition of whatever you want to call that here. And And what it was very mystical, incredibly mystical. And in fact, I was telling you before we did this interview that my second book is about mysticism. And when so with the first book, for instance, and with the book that I'm writing now, and the ones that I'm being told I'm going to write, everything is through channeling. And so you just kind of tap into this higher energy of yourself, called the higher self. And all of this frequency is just so natural to me, but I understand that it's not to everyone. But what they showed me was that mysticism and I said, when they told me I was going to write a book about mysticism, or more specifically alchemy, I'm going, I have no clue. You're talking to the wrong guy here. Okay. I mean, Hugh might be a better author on this, but they said, no, we will show you exactly what we're trying to explain in terms of alchemy and mysticism. And it didn't take very long. When I finally decided I wanted to write this book, it was pretty clear that the viewpoint of which I was going to write this book had nothing to do with the previous experiences that people have had with the science of mysticism. It had nothing to do with the mystery schools, although I do talk a little bit about them, but I don't talk a lot about them. It's not about that. It's about the purest essence of mysticism. And the purest essence of mysticism is that everything that is everything and everything that is nothing is being done through our consciousness, us as consciousness. Mm-hmm. Everything, every single thing, every element of the universe that we seem to know or don't know yet is already in us, not physically, but etherically. And so it's all here. And it's all being created instantaneously by us. And so my job is to try to explain that the modern day alchemist has more to do with sort of the mind mysticism versus the things that people often equate alchemy with. Because even those things were created of the mind, which was created of the consciousness. And so that's the evolution of where we're at. In fact, even with some of the stuff that you talk about in terms of the medicinal holistic herbs and plants, it's all about that. It's about accessing the holistic. It's about accessing the mind consciousness, the place where it all begins and where it all ends, and where there is no ending and beginning. It's just there. And I was like, okay, let's go. And so I'm into my second chapter, but I do feel like it's already coming together really nicely in a way that people today, whether they're doing anything seriously about consciousness, or they're doing anything to really awaken themselves through various other ways, through medicinal plants or what have you, they'll get it, because the end goal, regardless of what path you take, is to realize who you truly are. And it's not just, okay, yeah, great, I understand that. It's about doing more than that, becoming it, becoming the essence of it, and actually emoting it into reality, and to become a mystic, to truly become a mystic, the way that you are, but you just don't remember yourself to be. And that's really the beauty of what's going on right now globally, in terms of the fourth and fifth dimensions, what those energies are supposed to be bringing in. It's all about awareness. And when we get to that level of awareness that's so incredibly pure, it just starts triggering a whole assortment of different energy frequencies we never thought were embedded in us, whether it's in our bodies or in our etheric minds. So yeah, sorry, I went off on something, but you just tapped on it, and you just tapped into something that was so important to resonate with people. And it's why we're doing what we're doing today, why you and I have connected. Is there's something deeper, something much bigger. If we could just try to divorce ourselves from what's happening in the physical world, whether it's on a personal level or whether it's on a global level, it's huge. It's massively huge. So anyway.
So you've got the first book. It's The Closet Spiritualist. And And that's about you having this mystical experience and wanting to share it so that others can gain their personal mystical experience.
Right. You know, the two things that I've noticed from all sorts of people talking about this subject, and a lot of people who I highly respect in terms of where they're getting their insight, whether it's through their research or whether it's through their uh, inward knowingness of or quest, regardless. These are some people that I feel have pieces to the puzzle. But what I don't see a lot of is I don't see a lot of the how and the why. Now, the how piece of it, people will say, well, you know, everybody has their own individual path they have to take. Indeed, they do. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel trying to figure out what your path is. Once your path is there, then as with your guides, you get sort of helped along the process of your quest and your journey. Um, we don't have to go in blindly with the how. So my story, the way I wrote it, the way they actually wrote it, because 2/3 of the book was all channeling, was that they wanted my life, in essence, to be an example of how one can screw it up and so badly, you know, because that's where we start from, right? We start from all the mistakes that we will make in trying to figure out who we are. We do all the things that we're supposed to do, supposedly, you know, 1 + 1 = 2 and 2 + 2 = 4. And if I do this and I meditate for 5 hours and I do this and that, it's all going to come together. And so really my story, the first half of my book in particular, is about really the difficulty that I went through in opening up myself to the innerness of who I really am. That there was this voice crying out in me, trying to tell me that that's who I really am, not this person that I've been told all my life by the social conditions of this physical reality to be. That's not easy, because even under my book, it says the Closet Spiritualist, the subheading is the most difficult thing you'll do. Um, what is, I can't even remember now what it is. The hardest thing you'll ever do the hardest thing is waking up to your truth, to
Yeah.
who you are. The hardest thing you'll do is to wake up to the truth of who you are. That is the hardest thing. I don't care. And the reason for that is because the biggest addiction we have is the addiction of all the fears that we have been embedded with. And it is so hard to even go that route. But as you probably know, because of all the work that you do with all your clients and with the people you talk to on your podcast, it doesn't have to be that difficult. And there are ways to get there if you're struggling with it. Okay. So you don't have to go through every piece of the coursework that you think is a coursework to get there. So that's why I encourage people to if they're really struggling, if they're really analytically minded and they just can't get off of that, I encourage them, if they're willing to be a little open-minded, to go down the route of medicinal plants and psychedelics to help them to open up those portals within themselves that will give them quick access, so that at the very least they can remember a little bit of who they are. Just like my near-death experience, that it was enough to remember who I was so that I could start the quest inward and become who I am and always have been. So yeah, a long-winded answer to, yeah, the book is supposed to be there to help people see how they can navigate through their inner quest. And I call it inner quest, Hugh, because too many times we focus on the outer stuff, and that's called the outer journey.
Yeah.
And I have 2 chapters, one on each of those. And the outer journey is not what it's about. As you know, the outer journey is really just a reflection of what's going on inside of you. And that is not just a saying that a real cool saying, it's true. It's a mere reflection of you. It is a mere reflection of you. And so you've got to really start inwardly. And hopefully my book does that.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm reading a similar treatise of ancient Toltec shamanism, and we talk about the tonal, the waking world, which is a reflection of the dreaming world, and the goal is to wake up in the dreaming world so that you wake up in the real world.
See, that is so, okay. I mean, again, you and I could have really long, cool conversations outside this, because that's exactly it. I mean, okay, everybody who's watching this show right now, just take a deep breath and just try to absorb what he just said, because it is the end all of be alls. Okay. It's the fact that we are literally, and I'm going to expound on that a little bit more, but we're literally experiencing a holographic reality that I've been shown as a game, a real game. Okay. I mean, a real virtual reality game. And as I just told somebody not long ago, they asked, well, why a game? And it's like, well, because source, whatever you call God, but I'll call it source for now. Source is a very playful energy. It's a childlike energy, and source really gets a lot out of experiencing itself through games. And so this is not a metaphor. This is how this reality is structured. And there's a lot of stuff now coming out in quantum physics, astrophysics, and sacred geometry, and all the stuff. There's a lot of stuff now that is pointing towards that as a conclusion to what it is that we're experiencing here. And inside that game, the trick, well, not the trick, but the way the game is played is that we go to sleep when we come here. And so the irony of all irony, and this is really, really sort of the purest definition of a dualistic reality, is that the irony of all irony, okay, is that when we're awake, like what we're doing here, supposedly,
Yeah.
we're actually spiritually asleep. And when we're asleep, we're actually awake. And the game forces you, tricks you into thinking it's the other way around. Everything in the duality is about turning all the things that would be so crystal clear, but it isn't, because it's flipped upside down to make it look like it's just the opposite. So everything that we're experiencing here, call this is physical reality, man. I mean, I could touch it, I could, whatever, that is actually the game, in the dream of the game. And in the book, I talk about a couple chapters about how you wake up from the game by waking up from the dream state. You have to wake up from the dream state in order to wake up and win and beat the game, or win in the game. But it's all a game. And if people could start realizing that, I think it would make it a little bit more fun than all of this drama that's going on right now in the world. It's still challenging. It's still supposed to get you to an experiential ascension, let's call it, where you learn how to meld two forms of consciousness together: the absolute consciousness, which is what we are when we die, and this physical reality, and create a whole new universe that actually has this new form of consciousness, which is why it's so exciting. But for most people here, look, folks, just remember, this is a game, and the game tells you that when you're awake, you're really actually asleep. And then you have to kind of wake yourself up, like a lucid dream. If people have had lucid dreams, and I'm sure a lot of people do, and that's what you kind of do when you're doing these various experiences through psychedelics.
Yeah.
This is why you are shown this, so you can start to lucidly wake up in this world, which is actually the illusion. You do that, game over. That's what's happening right now globally around the world, is that people, that's the game. You have to win. It's a school. You have to show that you know this, not just intellectually. You got to be able to apply it so that you can ascend. I mean, it's like any school. It's not about good or bad or failing or not. It's just about, you've been here for 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years in this school, not to mention all the other schools you've been in. You got to show what you've learned.
I don't know if our listeners who aren't watching the video will be able to see, but I've smiled about 6 times while Franco's speaking. So if you're listening and tuning in, and you see me with that Jaguar smile, Cheshire Cat smile, you know that it's truth.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really do. I'm looking right at the camera, so I'm not even seeing your reaction. So I appreciate that you're smiling. But the sacred schools, if we want to even go there, I'll just say that what I'm writing in the book is that these mystery schools knew this.
Yes.
And they knew it. And the way the game is played, okay, is that these schools were meant to have you ever heard of the game Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I never played it, all right? And probably a good thing that I didn't, because I probably have been missing for years by now. But I used to remember I
Miss.
used to re- I used to remember how people would just get completely lost in that game. I mean, it was layers upon layers upon layers of just this world that they were living and creating simultaneously. And so, if we can just realize that, like a game of Dungeons and Dragons, we have these mystery schools that were designed to provide us with all the wisdom and knowledge of what we are, and that in time they would come back again, like a good game. Level 6 out of level 7, you get to tap into this mystery stuff again that was hidden for years, because levels 3, 4, and 5, they just, you had so many other things you had to deal with, much less a mystery school kind of thing. Yeah. That's what the game is progressing to. And it's not to dilute everybody's sort of spiritual belief system. It's supposed to be to get excited and realize that you can actually, because you've been playing games all your life as a child, you can actually tap into that pretty easily and start actually getting a little bit more empowered by the fact that you do actually have control over your reality, not the way that everybody else tells you that you're separate from everything and you have no, like, you're separate from God, you're separated from everything that could give you any of these sort of these immortal powers, which it is. And if you would have asked, if I could see myself 5 years ago, I mean, 5 years ago, if that person were watching me talking to you about this, they would have thought I was just out of my mind, which I am. But yeah, it's sometimes hard for people who might be even listening in to go, is this really possible? But it is. And it's not just stuff you see in the movies, because the movies are actually like a game, there to give you clues. If they're resonating with you, it's a clue that they're trying to open up, activate some sort of a DNA coding system in your body, in your etheric mind, and away you go. So and the beauty is it's happening right now. So I don't know exactly what your original question was, but that's that's where we landed.
I'm gonna segue, and I love this. I love this concept of the game, and that Source is playing the game, and Source is a playful entity.
Yes.
And because I feel like that's the same as some of the Native American traditions. I was studying about the Heyoka and the Hopi, and they have like even a gambling kachina this weekend I learned about.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, okay, so gambling wasn't really a thing, but it was so natural that they made a deity for it as soon as it was introduced. Wow. They had, every culture around the world has had versions of gameplay, and all of those versions of gameplay came from divination and the ability to communicate directly with Source.
That's crazy.
But hey, I want to segue. I'm going to take a little break. We're gonna pause the recording, and we're gonna jump back in right after this break with Franco Romero and talking about Source and his books.